first of all, thank you for being here. It's nice to see your big faces again. For the next 2 weeks, we will have readers, poetry readers. October 6th is Octavio Quintanilla. In fact, he's a poet and visual artist, so this should be a rather interesting event. And those are held in DePerno in the auditorium next door on the ground floor. And then the following week is Jennifer Pashley, who's a fiction writer. And it's not until October 20th that we will have Reeds and Keys. And that's an ensemble with Judy Marchionne bassoon, Colleen O'Neill clarinet, and then Tina Toglia will be back, the pianist. Today we're really a pleasure to have Tina here. I think you're going to enjoy the program immensely. She extremely has performed so many different places and in different events and ensembles. So it's a pleasure to have her here. And I invite you to join Dr. Toglia as she takes us for a walk in the woods.
Thank you. Thanks for coming out today. And I want to thank Utica College for having me. And I want to thank Dave for being such a gracious host, letting me into practice. And he was very accommodating. Thank you. So I first performed this program last April around Earth Day, as I was, after being stuck inside all winter, I just kept thinking about being outdoors, and so I chose a lot of pieces that are about nature, but now I think every day should be Earth Day, so I'm playing it again. And we're going to start out in the forest. We're going to start out Alone in the Forest. That's the first piece. I'm switching the order of the second and third pieces, so I'll play the Alone in the Forest and then the Juniper, and I'll end that set with the list. Oh, should I be using this? Okay.
In case you want to.
Okay.
If you do, take the glasses off. Hit the left one.
Okay.
Hold it till it turns green. It's ready.
Okay, great, thank you.
And opposite to
And
shut out.
opposite to shut out, okay. So we'll start out Alone in the Forest, and then end that set with, there'll be a little windstorm in the forest, which is the title of the list. It means literally forest murmurs. And it starts out with a very gentle breeze that then becomes quite a gale, and then the little breeze dies away. And then we'll watch the moon rise. And then we'll come upon a river and a waterfall. And then it'll begin to rain. Jardins sur la pluie, gardens in the rain. And then the sun comes out at the end. So that's the little journey for the program. So the first three pieces, the first one, Alone in the Forest, is by Germaine Taillefer. She's a not so well-known French composer, and she lived from 1892 to 1983, so quite a long time, and she continued composing all through her life, right up until the 1980s. And she was the only female member of Les Six, the Six, which was a group of French composers around the turn of the century, early part of the 20th century, who opposed the lush music of Wagner and Debussy. So these are composers like Poulenc was part of this group, although I consider Poulenc's music rather lush, it doesn't quite make sense. But Satie and Arthur Honegger, those are some of the composers in that group. She was the only one. Rachel Portman is a living composer. She is a British film and television composer who has won Oscars, BAFTA awards like the British Oscars. She is Order of the British Empire. She's a dame. She's very well respected. This is from her first collection of music that isn't for film or TV. It's called Ask the River, and it's a set of pieces. Very, very beautiful, scored for piano and strings. And this is she's created a solo piano book of all the pieces. And I find them so beautiful. They're minimalist in style, so they're a repetitive pattern that goes on with small, subtle changes, but I find it very hypnotic in a beautiful way. And the list, as I described earlier, starts out with a gentle wind, becomes quite a roar, and then travels off. I think I turned that off. And I'll try not to talk too much. just say a couple things about the next two pieces. They're very popular classics, Clair de Lune and the Moonlight Sonata. And Debussy is featured twice on this program, and Debussy wrote quite a lot of music that features nature or describes nature. Once you know that and you start looking at all of his titles, and they're very descriptive, they're not just fanciful titles like the Moonlight Sonata. When Beethoven wrote that, it had nothing to do with moonlight. He wasn't thinking about describing moonlight. It was just, he wrote the sonata, and his publisher thought that it would sell better if it had a fanciful title. So the publisher gave it the title of the Moonlight Sonata, and Beethoven became very weary of people referring to it as the Moonlight Sonata. That wasn't his idea. Anyway, that's all I want to say about those. Oh, well, I do want to say one more thing. I sort of think of, it came to me this week that Clair de Lune, it almost feels like a very slow dance, like a dance in the moonlight. There's something about the rhythm in it that I think, because it's in triple meter, and a lot of dances are in triple meter, if you can sort of picture dancing under the moonlight. And the Beethoven Sonata, completely different mood. When I play this, I think of Beethoven in the middle of his life, knowing that he was losing his hearing. And losing his hearing was not a musical impediment for him at all. Of course, musicians can hear in their head, and he could hear everything he was composing in his head. But it was a social impediment for him, and he was a very proud person. So it really held him back in a social way. He really would not say, I'm sorry, or didn't want to admit that he was losing his hearing to people around him, and he became increasingly gruff and difficult to deal with, I think, because he was dealing with that. So you hear a lot of dissonance in the Moonlight Sonata, and that's what I sort of think of when I hear that. The next piece, Luliang River by Wang Zhanzhong, was a Chinese composer. He lived from 1933 to 2016. He was a pianist and an educator. Many of his works were composed during the Cultural Revolution, so he had to work, you weren't allowed outside Western music. So a lot of composers at that time took folk music and some Western music and tried to create a bridge, which is what he did. Excuse me. And he was very, very popular. He's almost a household name in China. This river is in Hunan province, and it's an old song that praises the river for its beauty and for providing sustenance for the people of Hunan. And you can hear sort of a gentle lapping of the water on the boat in the left hand. Once the piece starts, you have sort of so that's sort of the water and the rocking of the boat. It's very, very beautiful. Oh, one more. Well, I won't use the mic. The Jennifer Lynn, whose pieces follow that, she's an American living composer, and she writes a lot of music for young pianists, for festivals and competitions and that sort of thing. Her music is really beautiful. She tends to write things that are rather impressionistic, so kind of in the style of Debussy, and you'll hear that in her two pieces, Evening Tide and By the Waterfall. Of course, all three of these pieces being about water, they have lots of running arpeggios and lots of pedals. So the, maybe won't use the microphone. Just the last two pieces, Gardens in the Rain by Debussy, and Here Comes the Sun, written by George Harrison, the Beatle, one of the most popular Beatles songs. In the Debussy, he uses two children's songs throughout the piece. The one you're going to hear the most, it sounds like this. It shows up in minor. It shows up in the bass. Everywhere. You're going to hear it all the way through. The other one isn't so easy to hear. And Here Comes the Sun was written at his relief at the arrival of spring, which is something that around here we can all appreciate. He wrote, "It seems as if winter in England goes on forever. By the time spring comes, you really deserve it." And I know we can all relate to that. There are several time changes because he was studying Indian classical music at this time, so there's a couple meter changes, which is kind of unusual for a pop song.